time out of your schedule. For those that I haven't spoken to, Happy New Year. We wanted to make sure that we started talking about starting off the year right this year with the webinar of things that we're starting to see in some of our claims that are coming through. And one of the things we're starting to see is the prevalence of website complaints with regard to being ADA non-compliant. And as we start to work through the year, we'll try to focus on some things where we start to see claims trends. And this is one where we've actually gotten some press releases and some press notices that have also added to our experience in our book with having these claims hitting nonprofits. So in order to start with this topic, it's important to understand the Americans with Disabilities Act. So basically, Americans with Disabilities Act was a really important piece of legislation, and for those people who've worked much in the employment practices liability space, it's also a big claims driver in that space. And so what it came down to is Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against anyone with disabilities. And it was all about getting everyone onto a level playing field so that you didn't have any discrimination that was either subtle or there was some reason to try to work around someone with a disability not being employed. Instead, what it does is it enables the employer or requires the employer to find a way to work with employment, but it doesn't stop with employment. So we talk about employment practices liability a lot, but often what we have is employment practices liability doesn't stop with employment, and this is a prime example. So anytime there's something with public access, so whether it's public access to a building, or it's public access to a restaurant, or anything that has public access, it has to enable the capability for accommodating those with disabilities. So the design has been utilized in the Act, has been utilized in some cases for older buildings that haven't been updated and wheelchair ramps aren't wide enough to let wheelchairs through, or the bathroom doors don't have room for wheelchairs to be able to get through the bathroom doors. Those are a couple of examples that have been some typical claims over time that we've seen. But when you look at the definition of a disability, and while the Act was done before the internet really was formed, the definition of a disability is really what's important here. And so when we think about perceptions of disabilities, when people think about a disability, often what you'll hear is someone in a wheelchair, someone who has needs of other forms of mobility, whether it's crutches or they're missing a limb, or someone who's blind with a seeing eye dog, or with the red tip cane. So when you look at what people's perception of a disability is, it's often the things that are seen. And there have actually been public relations campaigns about invisible disabilities. And so there are often disabilities that you can't necessarily see, but that still doesn't mean that someone doesn't fall into the disabled category. So here's a kind of an exploded visual for you of the definition of a disability according to the ADA. And this is important because when you look at it, it's any impairment that substantially limits one or more of life's major activities. So when you think about that, we often, again, we go to the things we've visually seen in the past, and that's an easy thing to pick up and recognize for a disability. But then you look at some of these invisible disabilities and the ones that are often referred to that way. And so you've got these cases that are landmark cases that actually highlighted the effect that disabilities don't have to be something that's visible and seen, they can often be something that's not, and there has to be reasonable accommodations made for that. And so one of the ones, when you look at AIDS, someone with AIDS, this case was really interesting because one of life's major activities is actually procreation. And AIDS actually limits the ability for procreation, and therefore it is a disability. So when you look at the different aspects of what's a disability, it's really broad ranging. So while in some degree we're talking about the employment practices side of things on the policy in the ADA, now what we do is when we start looking at the hearing and the visually impaired, these are things that often you can't see someone who's hearing impaired unless they're signing. And the visually impaired, it's going to be if there's some, designator, like I mentioned before, seeing eye dog, or their cane, or they have a sighted guide with them. But what the Americans with Disabilities Act didn't do was address the internet. And while it didn't address the internet, because the internet really wasn't what it was when this was enacted, what you're looking at is you are looking at a public space when you look at the information superhighway. So you're looking at all areas of public life that are open to the general public. And this is where there's a little bit of neglect with respect to some organizations. And this has been something where we've seen a prevalence of claims, but then you're starting to see them hitting and there's enough volume starting to hit now that it's starting to have, again, the press coming into play with it. So when we look at it, there have been a lot of arguments of whether or not the ADA was meant to apply to websites, to the access and the information that's contained on the net. And so when you look at all areas of public life, was it intended for the digital landscape? Well, the reality is that it may not have been intended for that because it wasn't created yet, but the design of the law has been broad enough that it can be utilized that way. And one of the things that's important when you're looking at the website access is whether or not there needs to be changes to the law. That's one argument that has been made. But the other flip side of it is there's already been case law getting established that's taking care of it. And then the second question was, does it really have an adverse impact? And so when you look at that, basically what you're staring at is there is now a broader look at the way the ADA applies as you look at some of the case laws that's developed. And it's important to recognize these changes have taken place for the customers that we're insuring or that you're working with as a client. So when you start to look at the actual cases themselves, there are quite a few cases that have stated that web accessibility is definitely within the purvey of the ADA. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So we've had situations where performing arts nonprofits have had videos embedded. Well, the videos didn't have any subtitles in them, and so it wasn't being enabled for the hearing impaired. At other times, we've had other accounts where it's a general account, and when the potential beneficiary of their services goes to work through the website and they're visually impaired, the website didn't have any of the compatible requirements so that they could navigate the site, so they really couldn't find out where they were supposed to go through the site with what's enabled with the visually impaired software that helps them to run their navigation. So those are two of the primary examples of what we're seeing is when the websites haven't been all-inclusive on that expansion. And so when you look at it and you look at the volume that's starting to happen, we have the violations that have been ruled, but then on top of which, the number of lawsuits are really growing and expanding. And this is an active area, so it's really important for us to all recognize that if it's an active area, we're making our customers and clients aware of it. And so while there is a lack of the regulations surrounding it, the case law is starting to pile up. And this is the other thing. Even if you don't lose in court on this particular topic, it's still going to be expensive to have to defend it, because it's a specialty area of the law. And there will be some experts that are probably going to be brought in talking about, you know, what it would take to actually be compliant. The other thing is, if a nonprofit happens to be going through a redesign of their website, often it's much easier to design the website with a lot of the software already enhanced than it is to go back and retrofit. So especially if it's a much older website design, web design, some of the newer designs and the easier ways to put a website up can also include some of these aspects of making sure that it's compliant with the ADA and minimize any probability for having a claim filed against the organization. So with that, I kept it really quick, trying to keep it succinct, start off the year on the right foot. If anyone has any questions, we can field them at this point.
All right, Matt, it looks like no one has any questions just yet. Why don't we give everyone 30 to 60 seconds and see if anyone comes up with a question.
Okay.
All right, Matt, first question. How would I know if my website is ADA compliant or works with visually impaired software?
Okay, it's a great question. So when you're looking at whoever has designed the website, you should be able to get access to that information. So someone should be able to let you know. One of the things that's a solution in the short run, if you're doing videos or whatnot, often if you utilize the platform for YouTube, YouTube brings some of the compliance to the table and actually will be able to have the subtitling go with it. So there's certain things that you can go with it, and subtitling doesn't help the visually impaired. But if you work with whoever your developer was who developed the website, that's the best way to find out and to make sure that it was compliant.
Fantastic. So will you offer information on where to go to find requirements for website ADA? Is that information included in this PowerPoint?
Another great question. So everything in the PowerPoint will be sent to all of you who have attended. So, and for those who have signed up and weren't able to attend, within the PowerPoint we've included the links. And so the links, while I don't know if they'll work when it goes as a PDF, you'll be able to copy it into a browser, and you can go and look up the different articles. And so if you go through the different articles and the different information that's there, there's a lot of information that's available, and they'll talk about the different things that are areas to check for and look for with respect to compliance concepts. And if you do have any other questions, you can always email me or email one of the members of the team that you do know at Victor US, and we'll make sure that we can get you some additional resource material if there's not enough in what we've provided.
Okay, great. That sounds like a good segue into maybe ending the questions for today, giving people time back, and maybe giving them your contact information, Matt.
Okay, so my email address is Matt, M-A-T-T, .Kletzley, K-L-E-T, Z as in zebra, L-I, at victorinsurance.com. So if you send me an email, I'll be happy to get you as much information as we can. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Try to keep it short and sweet, and hopefully it was informative. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and have a great day. Take care.